And tonight on PM Express, a very sensitive conversation that has been triggered even before we get to the next stage of election 2024, even as the political activities have just begun. You may be aware of all the matters arising after Greek Minister Brian Acheampong said the NPP will never hand over power to the NDC, and this has attracted wide condemnations from all angles, with the NDC saying that the Greek minister should be arrested and interrogated. Well, the NPP is equalizing. They're actually calling for the arrest of former President Mahama and the chairman of the NDC for making similar comments in the past. Now, the question remains, do these political parties know the consequences of their actions on the nation? Really, is it the hate speeches or intemperate languages that win them power? And really, do they have we, the people of Ghana, at heart? Well, let's do some background check and let's look at whether such situations have been, beneficial to the nation in the past. But what really transpired, and this is what has transpired. This is the comments that has attracted all these condemnations. He said NPP will never hand over power to the NDC. The party will use all means necessary to remain in power. If the NDC dares use threats and brute force in 2024 elections, the NPP will show them that they have the men. This has been the response. Fifi Kwete, who is General Secretary of the NDC, says the comment is a pattern among the NPP. He's calling for police service to act with dispatch on the matter, argues comments can subvert Ghana's democracy's order. Now, Brian Acheampong's comments, and this is the NPP's defense to what has happened. He said it was a response to treasonable comments from the NDC. He only gave encouragement to supporters of the NPP who feel intimidated by the NDC's threats, and John Mahama and Asiedu Nketia should be arrested for their similar comments in the past. Now, the NDC legal team, we know, petitioned the IGP, and the NPP has also petitioned the IGP. The NPP claims that there's a grand scheme to subvert the people's will in 2024 elections. Now, any attempt to resist the NPP, they said, will be met with violence, and they've asked the police to also act swiftly in terms of arresting Mr. Mahama and Asiedu Nketia. They've accused the two of violating the Criminal Offences Act. The comments contain threats to overthrow the constitutional process established. So there's been condemnations coming from all angles. You may have heard CDD Ghana, the National Peace Council, says it will engage political parties over the comments. They've appealed to political actors to be careful and guard what they say. So tonight, that is the question. That's what we're actually going to be doing. How do we guard against a potential nation breaker? Intemperate language, hate speeches. But question again, do these politicians have you and I at heart? Your guess is as good as mine. Welcome back to PM Express, and I'm grateful that, gentlemen, you were able to join me. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, he's Director for Advocacy and Policy Engagement at the Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, who's also joined us, is Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG. Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah, his former UN Governance Advisor. And you have Dr. Kwame Asante, who is Senior Lecturer at the Department of Political Science, University of Ghana, and also Director at the Center for European Studies. Gentlemen, I'm grateful for your time this evening. Let me quickly pick your reactions on what has transpired throughout the week. We all know, we've heard the comments that were made by the Greek minister, and we know the reactions. The latest is that the NPP is actually equalizing, and it's asking the police to arrest former President Mahama and the chairman of the NDC for making similar comments in the past. Let me pick your quick thoughts on this, and I'll start with you, Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah.
All right, thank you, and happy to be with my friends tonight on this forum. First of all, I believe that anyone who has observed Ghanaian elections since 1992 will not be surprised by what is happening. Towards elections, certainly you're going to have these antics by the politicians or the political parties. They're going to make bombastic statements, putting the nation needlessly on edge and all. So I wasn't surprised by that. But, you know, I think our political parties or politicians, they are taking Ghanaians for a ride. I believe so. They are not serious. Look, this nation is facing very serious problems, and I'm expecting those who want to lead this country to really begin to tell us exactly in terms of policies that they will initiate to arrest this deterioration national situation. So even for us to assemble tonight to discuss what certainly to me is a very, very flimsy issue, and frankly, it's a waste of time. I think if they don't have any serious policies to discuss with Ghanaians, they better give us peace and just avoid these antics that they've started engaging in. That's my initial reaction.
Dr. Akwete, is there any justification for any political party to choose this path?
So,
Dr. Akwete, kindly unmute for me, Dr.
Hello.
Akwete. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you now.
You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
You see, these guys want to see me. I'm too handsome to appear on the screen. And so you are fidgeting, you know, Kojo especially. So and there is no justification for it whatsoever, except that I think the duopolies take elections for them overrides any value. And therefore, they are starting the elections, their electoral contests and the campaigns even much earlier than we are ready. The financial crisis, the anxieties in the society, the poverty, the deprivation, the uncertainty about the future is not an issue they want to address, or probably doesn't reflect on their radar. Because I thought that's what they will be speaking about and assuring and competing in how to turn the situation around and give us a better life. But to go straight to the issue of threatening that no matter what, whether you win or lose, you wouldn't hand over power, I mean, that violates, it undermines democracy. Liberal democracy, multi-party democracy is the norm. In fact, that's the peaceful, what leads to the peaceful transition of power and no violence. And violence seems to be taking over. It's not the end, what is going to give to a nation by the end to them themselves, whether we win or lose. And I think that it ought to be condemned in no uncertain terms, but that is not enough. I have a feeling that the old politics of violence or the third term, each of them have had equal 2 terms in office. And therefore, who gets the third term has become so important to this game they play. And I think it is not necessarily going to happen the way, but it's good it's come up early, and we ought to address it squarely. Because if you violate the norms, the cardinal norms, the elite consensus that underpins things, then you're undermining the whole democracy. And as I said earlier, our parties should know that these are not good times for us in our region.
Go ahead, Dr. Akwete.
These are not good times for us in our region. The risks around us calls for our coherence and national unity, our vigilance, so that we wouldn't have jihadists infiltrating and creating havoc. Our division would lead to our losing out on this battle. And so I think it's good also they've spoken early so we can condemn it all round and provide the options, the tracks that they should rather pursue in the national interest.
Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, you and I have had cause to complain about some of these things. I mean, the last elections were examples, or there were lessons from that election that we could take from. What does all of these mean to the already uncouth environment that we have leading up to the 2024 elections? Kindly unmute for me, Dr. Asante.
Sorry about that. Good evening to everybody for Bad and Dr. Kwete, Dr. Asante. I don't know whether to say I'm angry or just frustrated. Sometimes it's just a sense of disbelief, because really 8 people died in the elections of 2020, and we're still yet to know the outcomes of police investigations and whether people have been held accountable. None of the people who are there threatening mayhem and and all of the things that they are saying will be at the forefront of those shenanigans when they try to engage in violence. So they are there, say, oh, we are going to do this, and we have this, and we're going to sacrifice people. Are they the ones going to be there doing that? So I think it's shocking that we are a country that is really on its economic knees. We still are trying to conclude this IMF deal so that we can find some way through. We just don't know the effects. Just even a couple of days now at the IMF spring meetings, the kinds of projections they are making about the economy for Africa is dire. We haven't even seen the real effects of this economic struggle that we are going to be in for the next 5 years. And we expect our political leaders who are auditioning to lead our country to be giving us solutions to those problems. So I'm really disappointed in Mr. Brian Champoy in particular, because he was a national security advisor. He was a minister of state at the Ministry of Interior. So he knows, these kinds of incendiary language and where it can lead to. In the context, as Dr. Kwete has said, in an Africa region where it's just replete with all kinds of threats, from external and internal. So we really, Ghanaians don't really need this. And I'm glad that it's come early, because I think that citizens are still being spectators. They need to let their political leaders know. And even the party members, they need to understand that, this kind of game, this kind of, approach to party politics hasn't taken us anywhere for the last few decades. And if we don't change tact, we are going to continue, down the path of just stagnation and deterioration. So we really need to speak up and say, we want political parties to compete with ideas, and let us see the solutions they have. They should spend a lot more of their energy, almost all of their energy, on that, and not, who have the men or who have the women and all of those things.
I'm happy that you talk about the fact that it's come early, so probably we could do something before election 2024. But the question again is, do the political parties themselves, are they ready to actually help in resolving this issue? Let me bring you in, Dr. Asa Asante, and I want us to do a reality check. If we are to learn some lessons from history, what has history taught us as far as hate speeches and intemperate languages are concerned with elections?
Yeah, Aisha, good evening. And let me say good evening to my seniors, right? If you look at what has transpired so far, and then coming back from history, you realize that nobody has won an election using threats or violence, all right? It doesn't work for anybody. If you really want to serve the people, you need to develop messages that resonate with them, that will, address some of their problems so as to win their hearts and minds. Okay, so if you have people who will not think along these lines and deceive themselves into believing that if you issue threats, if you want to undermine the system with hate speech and the rest of them, I'm afraid I'm going to countenance that. But sometimes I blame ourselves as a society. We have not punished them enough, all right? We see these things coming up every time we're going for elections. And then immediately after election, we'll forget about it, only for it to resurface when we're going for election. But if we have been serious about this issue and have punished them so much so that it will deter them, I'm sure by now they would have learned a lesson, one or two. But I believe that all is not lost yet. We need to make sure that we put certain institutions on the ground and ensure that these political actors will obey them, respect them. Whoever crosses the line, we should not hesitate to punish them, and by way of throwing them away. All these things doesn't have anybody. We are in difficult times. The economy is not in best of shapes, and that we expect them to think outside the box and try to see what they can do. Look at we are going to IMF and all the conditions that we are going to be confronted with. Have they thought about that? And the least they can give us is to what? Threaten the system and all that. I don't think that this will bode well for a democracy that we have struggled to build and want to nurture forever and ever.
I dare say this, Professor Agyeman-Gyia, that until the politicians themselves agree that this particular path is dire for the peace the country is currently enjoying, we can never get anywhere in trying to solve this. I mean, what then is the role of the political parties themselves in actually getting this matter resolved? Because you've heard the two major political parties, how they've had to handle this issue.
That's a very interesting question that you asked, Aisha. You know, we are locked into a political system that seems to give these dominant parties what my good friend keeps calling the duopoly that we have created. They're so comfortable in their seats in terms of the system that they inherit. And they're all fighting to take over that system for whatever reason. Of course, all of us can speculate on why they go to those lengths to gain power. And you're right. Until they sit down and realize the damage that they are inflicting on this poor country, I think it's going to be tough. Because we can, as civil society, we can be on the sidelines and say all we can. Ultimately, it will be the political actors. So maybe we need to begin to take certain actions to diffuse this duopoly. Why people talk of third way and all. But the fact is that our system seems to grant these political parties. Let me tell you something. The Constitution even requires of these parties to maintain internal democracy. Look at how they organize themselves. The parties can decide who becomes a parliamentarian and who cannot. That's completely anti-democratic. These days, they are even going into parliament to give directives to how parliamentarians should behave. I mean, these are the kinds of things that has given them these wings, like they are all in all, you know? So I think I don't have a direct answer to your very important question, I have to admit. But the fact is that the political system that we have is not healthy. This so-called winner takes all, that makes them develop this rabid rivalry, thinking that without gaining power, they don't have nothing in the country. You know? So as I say, I don't have the direct answer, but I think we need to begin to look critically at how our politics, you see, and how people get into this political arena and all of a sudden assume certain herbs as if they know better than anybody else in the country. Look, what we need, as my colleagues have been hammering on, what we need in this country are policies that will take us out of our current crisis. And more than that, we even need to be looking critically at our constitution to make sure it becomes a more effective constitution that ensures democracy at the grassroots and across board, but not democracy where everything comes from the top, and whether it's good or bad, the whole country gets affected by that. I think there are more serious questions. That's why in my first reaction to your beginning of this conversation, I said that, look, what you are doing, these antics and pre-election needless tension that they create with all these kind of unnecessary statements from both sides, I think Ghanaians, I tend to agree with my good friend, Dr. Asante, but then you ask yourself, how do you punish them? Through elections or what? So I think we have a serious problem with the way our political system is and the kinds of human agencies that tend to operate these systems and the visionless leadership that they provide this country, all leading to our current situation where a so-called independent country has almost become a fully dependent entity. I mean, it's so sad. It's so sad.
I will say that they're both culprits, the electorate and the politicians, because if one doesn't patronize the other, it definitely wouldn't work. And that's why I bring in Dr. Akwete, the electorate. And there's been the rhetoric when some of these things happen. They say, if the politicians really have we, the people at heart, why don't they invite their family to actually go take these kinds of assignments for them? But it's actually the ordinary Ghanaian. What part does the electorate play in actually bringing all of these into fruition?
Well, thank you. And I'm happy you raised the electorate. They have the power to change the situation, probably better than at any other time. We've done 30 years of the Fourth Republic. Whether we like it or not, we've completed what is called it's a transition. It's a generational transition, they call it. Most of the people in power are retiring anyway. And we have this new youth, better educated, well-connected globally, tools, they know different ways of mobilizing and so on. And they have learned how to vote. They are not criticizing voting, but they're saying that this democracy is not delivering their dividends, the development dividends, and their future looks bleak. And that's why development policies and what would transform the economy and create the jobs and bring the kind of prosperity. And they are very, very impatient about achieving prosperity and enjoying them. So it's a different group. And we've seen how they've acted and how they've even called for change the constitution and new constitution and all that. They've gone through all those motions and fixed the country issues. We should take them seriously. Whether we like it or not, they are the majority voters in presidential and parliamentary elections. Women, youth, people with disability, and so on and so forth. And they are saying that this reality we are living with is not working for them. They want change. How would they effect the change? And I think as we look at it that carefully, this is the context in which this threat has occurred. It is a time that even in the difficult times of the economy and so on, the national focus hasn't shifted from bringing about reforms that will make the system work better. And so when you're in a situation where the majority electorate are for reform, they are for changes that would enable them pursue the path of democratic development or developmental democracy, we then have to ask, how can they gather or mobilize them to take a stand that goes against the threat of violence? Because when the violence occurs, there are opportunities for development, for the economy to be grown, for rural communities to be developed, for housing and so on, will all be gone. We'll do more destruction. And so there's an electorate, and now that electorate does not vote in local elections very much. The low turnout in local elections is also because the youth that votes consistently high in turnout, high turnouts in the presidential and parliamentary, do not look at the local government. Now, interestingly, I keep referring to the CDD post-elections 2020 survey. In fact, I keep referring to it much more than they do. So I'm making good use of it, better than them. And what does it say? They said, if you're looking at thresholds, what majority could bring about reforms, whether we are voting or for a change or constitutional amendments, or we want to choose who should govern, who has the plan that works best for us. It's simple. They said 2 findings, outcomes out of many, but they are significant because they are all in the 70% and above. 71 says in this times, they are still interested in electing their chief executive, MMDCs. They don't want to do it with parties. But what makes many go to MMDC is that they want accountability of those who are the chief executives, those who control the budget, those who bring the ideas and promise they are going to solve the problems for them. They want that. But a higher percentage also said the local government system where we produce the development dividends, where we live, where our social needs are met and so on, it's not working. And yet they didn't tell us how do we solve this problem. But what they've said generally is that when you put it together, they want the 2 things done. Fix the local government system for it to work. So do we also want to elect our own mayors. Now the question is, how do we bring these 2 together? They are all above the 70. If you take referendum, you need 40% turnout and 75% yes. If you add the 2 and you can bring these 2 groups together, you could effect some change. And I think it's even possible to effect that change before the 2024 December or November elections. And it's a group that can be mobilized. And so long as they are conscientized or their awareness is also raised as to the opportunities they have to stop this violence, that is the first thing they threaten. 2 parties, not regulated in any way. The alternate power. We've seen the situation in Parliament, really neck to neck, marginal votes. Otherwise, you would wonder how the man who has been approved as Minister for Agriculture in a divided house or a hung Parliament, where actually part of the opposition went with him, to the champion of their own party, would also be the one who speaks about we wouldn't hand over power and so on. So democracy and democratic values do not drive quite a number of these people in the 2 parties. It's a winner takes all, and I want to win. I've been out for two terms, it's now my turn. That's how the system has worked. So the 3rd term, whether we would continue with 2 terms, or whether we would have a 3rd term for a party in the context we're living now, or whether we'll have an entirely new arrangement, are the options on the table. And they are not, we can't look up to them for them to do it themselves. The electorate is powerful, whether we like it or not. The group that I'm referring to, the new generation of leaders, the youth, probably better educated than any of the generations that have passed in our history. And they are determined. So they can vote. They can exercise their vote to bring those changes and say, look, ahead of the 2024 elections, we think that we want to see reforms where we can build consensus and where the evidence is clear that certain processes have been, they've gone through certain processes, and we can push forward those ideas. They can vote, and I tell you, they will vote to make changes if they are mobilized well to understand what the issues are. The idea that we can't mobilize the youth except the parties can do is not entirely true. I think that the civil society groups, women are mobilized, they are organized in their way. But how do we come together to raise that awareness and consciousness of the power they have to determine who actually wins the elections, or determine that it's not elections that must come first, but the institutions that we need to reform so that we can have the development that we need taking place. And these are the things that we ought to engage the options. It's not just the violence. There are also options to change the system and to bring about a more peaceful path to determine who governs us in 2024 elections. And I'm saying this because Once the youth vote, if we can have, let's say, I'm just example, referendum early. Okay, and it's possible that we could, if we mobilize the youth, the marginalized groups, those who say the winner takes all really hasn't worked for them. They are the majority. They are highly educated. They are well located in different places. Let them understand that if they cast their vote, assuming they get a 40-75 through, they are going to impact the parties and their manifestos ahead of 2024 because their decision is binding. The decision they make in a referendum will be binding on all the parties. They have to be implemented. And they can decide which party to support and which party would really have a manifesto that reflects the aspirations and their decision and the consequences.
True.
So there is a different way to look at these things to really mobilize against violence and to let the two parties know that, look, they are the majority voters and they want to see a future through the elections. So they can input into their manifestos ahead of 2020 elections. They can make the demands. And they would not allow themselves to be split between the two parties. They are a powerful category in themselves. They can mobilize their civil society, their citizens who know what they want. The parties are the vehicles they would use, and probably they can even look at other means of contesting the elections and avoiding violence, because violence will destroy every future that they would look upon it, given the risk we are facing. Besides, what is more worrying, and why I think some of my friends have said, no, let's pay all greater attention to how to have peace and navigate. What haven't we done about the threat of to our peace and the threat of violence?
Yep.
What haven't we done? Peace Council, Peace Path, this, Women at Globe, praying, churches, mosques, bishops, chief. What is it that we haven't done? And when we think that we've gotten to a point where hung parliament means you should work together, we believe strongly that if the parties are also in the executive, through the reforms of the local government or something, and the institutions are also reformed in a way that they can serve everybody objectively, they deal with different parties. Our institutions only deal with one party. They do not have the competence to deal with different parties in the executive space at the same time. It's because that has not been the reality they've been dealing with. But I feel strongly that this is the time we should raise the ideas, work with the youth, mobilize them, the women, the marginalized, the queen mothers, the chiefs, even say they are marginalized. And let us see if the parties will really not listen to us. But if we would submit ourselves to the fear, the threat, the fear, oh, stop fighting, oh, do this and do that, that even boosts them better. And I think that it is time for us to look at how the system can be reformed to stop this recurring violence. I thought that the parties would rather come to the idea that hung parliament, imagine if they were all working together, not in a winner-takes-all context like now, but they were working together in government, or they've shared local government amongst themselves. That is the electorate decision and so on. And MMDCs are not elected based on parties, but in reforming the institutions, we need the parties to be able to reform them in a way that will strengthen our institutions to deliver development. Imagine that we are on that path. It will be clear to everybody that the parties will not do some of the politics they're doing because they need to cooperate with the president to get access to resources. They need their access to resources to be guaranteed so they can get their share of national revenue, common fund, to serve their constituencies. And even their politics in parliament with their parties will change. You know, so there is a way in which we must raise awareness. We must look at the sum of policies and ideas and options on the table, the reforms that are required, the enormous work that has been done over the last, since 2010. This thing about CRC, CRIC, local government reforms, the election of this and so on. There are clear indications that some convergence is occurring. Can we also pursue that track? Instead of going on our knees, begging them, crying, we are afraid, though, and so on. God has given us what we need. The ideas, the brains, and so on and so forth, the people, the youth that have mobilized. They are the generational leaders in transition, and they cast their votes in presidential and parliamentary elections. So let's gather them. It's their future. Should we destroy the country? Where are they going to go? So I think we need to take a different path on this matter.
And of course, taking a different path means that awareness, creation of awareness. I'm happy you spoke about that, because I want to talk about the fourth estate of the realm, the media. It plays a very powerful role, and in some of these situations, the media is blamed for giving their platforms to such politicians to make those hate speeches. But I tell you, this is the challenge we face. Sometimes it's difficult for you. You can be on the guard, but sometimes you can just lose it, because within a second, the statement would have been made. It's not supposed to be a long one. One sentence can suffice to cause that havoc we're talking about. Dr. Kojo Asante, I mean, how can the media play this role effectively? Because I think we are challenged.
Before I come to the media, let me make some short-term recommendations. I think we forget that after the Ayawaso West War gun violence, we set up a bipartisan group to work out some processes of disbanding vigilante party, political vigilante groups. And then we also passed the Vigilantes and Related Offenses Act.
Correct.
Making a commitment that we couldn't pursue this path of, mobilizing young people to go and maim each other in the name of securing power or practicing democracy. So for me, if that is what both parties have agreed to, and I know the police have applied this law in the past and has, successfully prosecuted people in that regard. For me, the first thing, I'm appealing to the IGP to issue a statement, just like he's done in previous contests, to remind people that there is a vigilantism and related offenses law, and that if you are caught in it, you would face the full rigors of the law. That he should have that same engagement with the parties to remind them of their own commitments and their obligations, so that when the police is coming after them, nobody is going to say that they are being politically targeted. Right? We have to enforce these laws because we ourselves passed them. It was under the Akufo-Addo government that the vigilantism law was passed. And as I said, both parties participated in setting that up. So for me, that is one thing that we shouldn't forget. It's not just for those who finance organized groups. It's not for those who aid and abet or organize them. It's also for the individuals themselves who participate in those kinds of activities. They are all exposing themselves to, a criminal burden. And I think we need to keep reminding people, and if one of the things you talked about, the media, that is one of the things that we have to also keep reminding people, that there is laws against these kinds of activities. You can't say, oh, this is political talk, and just walk away, like, we keep doing. The second thing is that citizens have, I think Ghanaians, I don't know, we're just so slow to wake. Sometimes I struggle to understand. But the point is that if these kinds of activities are not checked, they derail all our collective aspirations for our children, for our siblings, for our loved ones. We all basically get stuck because a few people, for whatever they are seeking, are prepared to cause chaos. And as you said, none of those people send their children to go and cause any of those mayhem. 8 people died at the last election, right? So we have to speak up. And I think even media, I think people fear, civil society, why didn't you say something when this person says this? It's like 2 people fighting, and then the one who is going to try to separate them, you end up being beaten up. all the time. And because they have a duopoly, this is the kind of game that they keep playing and victimize everybody. So we are all victims. The ones that are standing on the sideline are also victimized. So we need to speak up and say, this kind of behavior, we don't accept it. We don't accept it. We are not going to even listen to you if you are going to keep saying that you are going to do this and threaten our peace, the little peace that we have to develop this in this country where we're already in trouble. And the third thing is, the parties, those young people who are being enticed with all kinds of, little short-term benefits that, oh yeah, go and defend your party, go and defend your party. When you are dead, the only thing they'll do is probably buy a nice coffin for you and maybe give a lump sum money to your family. That is what will happen. So they also have to wise up, is what Dr. Akwete is saying about the young people, that they are intelligent. They also have to wise up, that this game is really a game that only benefits a few people.
But I wonder if you would I wonder if you can blame the electorates, because they're actually hungry and somebody is promising them some peanuts. So they have to do their bidding to be able to get that peanut to feed.
It's not an excuse. It's no excuse. And it's just that we have seen this movie play over and over and over again. And so if you also don't learn the lesson, and I'm sure that you can ask people that there are stories of their friends who have been maimed and hurt, and some have died chasing these things. And what happened to them? Did they become billionaires after that? No. So I think that they also have to wise up that when people are inciting people to go and do this, and that they will not be there themselves. They are not going to bring their children there. They will be the first people that are far away from the scene when these things happen. So we need to, but for the media, shortly for the media, I think that we know what the rules and the setting is, and we have to call people to order. And otherwise, they shouldn't use your platform. And I think citizens, they are not speaking, but this is what citizens, in their difficult times like this, want to hear, how we are going to move ourselves from this difficult situation, and not, who is going to fight who.
Let me bring in Dr. Asante briefly. The temperature is getting heated, and by the time we get to January 2024, if we don't handle things carefully, things will get out of hand. What should be the watchword? Briefly, I'm running out of time.
One, we as a society must be vigilant relative to issues with any time we see any of the actors cross the line. We shouldn't have to condemn and then, take the necessary action. Two, the media must also help society. Even though you are not working as fast, right? You need resources to survive. But some of these things, you can boycott the activities where they come and then want to feature on your programs and all that. You can, boycott, prevent them from featuring on your programs. And that is one way that you can also cure this. Another way that we get opportunity.
Right, I think... All right, wrap it up for me, Dr. Asante. All right, I think there's a connection problem there, but he's made...
In all this, we need to make sure that...
We're having a bit of connection challenge. Doc, we're having challenges with your connection. It's better now. It's better now. Please wrap it up for me.
Okay. So, as I was saying, that we should be vigilant enough. Anybody who crosses the line, we should come out, condemn, and then make sure that if the person is looking for opportunity to be in politics or in government, we throw that person out. To the media, yes, you want to make money by way of your vocation and all that. But if you have such recalcitrant politicians who are notorious for these things we are talking about, don't give them your space for them to come and then misbehave. You can boycott their activities, and that will serve as deterrent others.
Let me bring in Professor Gyimendua also briefly for me. I spoke with the Peace Council this week, and the chairman actually indicated to me that they do not like meddling in the affairs of the political parties, because I asked him if he thought it was in the right direction to arrest the one who made this hate speech, or is it right for people who make such speeches to be arrested and interrogated? And he says he will leave that to the police. My question then is, what are your expectations of, and I'm happy CDD is here, IDEG is here, Dr. Asah-Asante himself is a political analyst. What are your expectations of these groups, the Peace Council especially, and other stakeholders as we head towards this critical election?
Well, I think these groups must be proactive going forward, because as I said from the beginning, these are not new things in our body politics. The political parties have been demonstrating these kinds of sentiments throughout the Republic. So I think groups like the Peace Council should be proactive, and the police also. Let me say one thing. I'm intrigued that in cases like this, is political actors who call on the IGP to make arrests. I thought the police, especially when Dr. Asante, Pumpuni Asante, referred to the existing laws on vigilantism, that when somebody is contrary to the law, shouldn't the police be proactive and call that person to account? So I'm curious about that. So I think all I can say is that going forward, all these agencies, the police, the Peace Council, civil society groups, all of us should be very proactive to preempt any such utterances by political actors. I think if we can do that, we can mitigate the effects of their so-called hate statements and all.
Professor Baffa Gyimendua, I'm grateful for your time. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete is with IDEG, Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante, lecturer, director, European Studies at the University of Ghana. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante is with CDD. I'm grateful that all of you were able to join. Viewers, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of our programs.